It was like a beacon of hope shining in the abyss, or a helpful guidepost suspended in the darkness. Nothing would ever erase the Earth from our thoughts. When did I last see it with my own eyes? Was it while I was in geosynchronous orbit above the planet during that DM engine orientation exam? Or during my observational visit to the lunar base? Or maybe it was... In any event, I had not seen it when the Moby Dick set sail, that much I was certain of. Our gaze was locked ahead of us at that time, toward the great alien armies blocking our path, towards that unknown abyss glimpsed through their soldiers. That was all we saw as we departed. We had no time to glance back at our beautiful birthplace, and I will never again see it with my own eyes, because it was annihilated during that battle. Nagi Kentaro was dreaming. It was a dream of the home he had lost 2 years prior. In a dream, memories are like writing in the sand. Upon waking, that sand is scattered in the wind, erasing all signs of it. Nagi awoke in darkness and, feeling as though he had just seen the earth vanish in the wind, shed tears of loss. We lost it. The earth. And then he remembered. He wasn't waking from sleep. He had been knocked out from the impact and had just regained consciousness. He was Nagi Kentaro. At one time, he was a brigadier general in the Earth United Government Forces. Now, he is responsible for captaining the Moby Dick as part of the Earthwide Colonization Project. The Earthwide Colonization Project, it was a project that aimed to scatter the seeds of life across space so that they might flower on other celestial bodies in preparation for the destruction of their home planet. It was thought up by humans, the dominant force on the Earth, to prevent the complete annihilation of everything that once lived on it. The United Government had known of the impending destruction for the last 30 years, or rather, it was formed as a result of that realization. One day, the Earthlings became aware that we were not alone in space, that countless other races existed in its vast expanses. And at that same time, they became aware of the coming crisis. The multitude of races had divided themselves into 2 distinct factions based on their physical structures, and were locked in an endless struggle. It was likely that their conflict would spread to the Earth. Upon learning of this, the Earthlings began amassing the majority of their supplies in preparation, and the Earth United Government was formed. Personnel, wealth, resources, all were collected and divided between their plans for defense and survival. Of course, there were many who refused to join under the umbrella of the United Government, but the whole world understood the gravity of the situation, so the few dissatisfied dissenters went ignored by the majority. Thus, the United Government developed parallel programs that would serve as wings to guide them forward. One to repel the alien forces, and one to ensure escape and survival. Among these were humanoid mobile weaponry, the dolls, a trump card developed to repel the alien armies using technology not of the Earth. They had no internal combustion systems of their own, relying instead on power transferred from a main generator. They were an all-purpose weapon miniaturized into a small frame, and in just under 10 years, a considerable number were manufactured. The Earth's defense forces were well prepared, or at least, they should have been. It seems we were overly optimistic, was Nagi's frank recollection. Mankind's fighting strength had made rapid improvements thanks to the development of the dolls and the DM engine power sources, but there was still nothing they could do. The 2 alien forces clashed in the planet's vicinity, their strength vastly outmatching that of the Earthlings. A single ant could not protect its nest while a dragon and tiger fought overhead. Even if the ant was dozens of times more powerful, all mankind could do was entrust their future to a handful of immigration ships. To escape, to survive, to flourish somewhere. Nagi and his crew turned their backs on the Earth and escaped, precisely because they carried those hopes. The flashes behind them, they turned their eyes from the destruction of their home planet. And so the Moby Dick began its journey, captained by Nagi. But at the end of their 2-year journey, the aliens had finally caught up to them. One of those two factions had pursued them and attacked them with biological weapons. The bioweapons were fearsome in the outer shell of the residential area. They phased through the hull and boarded the ship. Within each of them was an antimatter core, so they couldn't be disposed of carelessly while on board. Their destruction would pose a great danger to the integrity of the ship. A single young man had saved the ship from that predicament. His valiant efforts repelled the bioweapons, but he vanished along with his doll afterwards. However, that didn't mean the Moby Dick was safe. A strange planet had appeared before the ship, one that wasn't marked on any space chart they had acquired before departing the Earth. Why had nobody noticed the planet before then? Was it because we were too busy dealing with the pursuit forces, or... The Moby Dick's hull was seriously damaged, and they were unable to escape the planet's gravitational pull. Nagi, who had been issuing commands from the bridge, knew that an emergency landing was unavoidable, and did his best to minimize the damage to the ship during planetfall. And then came the crash. And after that, nothing. He had a dream of his beloved Earth while unconscious, and then he awoke. Where? Nagi, you've come too. Nagi heard a familiar voice respond. It was the Moby Dick's chief engineer, and his friend of several decades besides, Commander Vandam. Although they were no longer the same rank, their friendship had continued unaltered. What's the situation, Vandam? Not that great, but I guess you could say we lucked out. Vandam briefly explained what had happened. The Moby Dick had fractured in the upper atmosphere, and each piece of the ship crashed separately. Only the bridge and a few surrounding sections had crashed in the vicinity. None of the other pieces were anywhere in sight. And what of the planet? Is it capable of sustaining life? Vandam pointed to his right without a word, as Nagi turned his head at a loss for words. An enormous fissure ran down the outer wall, through which the night sky could be seen. So, we can breathe the air. Well, that's not all. The temperature's around 20 degrees Celsius. The gravity's 0.94 G, and the radiation levels are safe. It's habitable without any kind of protection. To think we'd end up on an uncharted planet by chance. If it wasn't by chance, it was someone's plan. We should make sure to thank him. It was as Vandam said. Though it was unfortunate the ship was in pieces and didn't survive the entire journey from Earth, it was nothing short of a miracle that its final stop was a place people could inhabit without the need for terraforming. Nagi thought it must have been the work of a higher power, either god or demon. And what about the rest of the bridge crew? Everyone's at work, scouting the surroundings, recovering the engine, gathering usable materials, stuff like that. There's a ton of things to do, and yet someone's still snoozing. A young female operator was slumped over her console nearby where Nagi lay. If he remembered right, she was Second Lieutenant Mai, and to think I was almost in last place. I'm getting too old for this. You're still a spring chicken, Vandam said as he gave Nagi a hard slap on the back. It wasn't surprising for him to praise him. Nagi had remained on the bridge as it shook and entered the atmosphere, guiding the ship until the very end. While the rest of the crew had braced themselves for impact, he was still at the helm. It was no surprise that he would wake up late. Although the chief engineer hadn't braced himself for impact either, instead managing the auxiliary engine and broken DM engine during the crash, he still woke up first, but his stubborn body was far from the norm, so it didn't really come as a surprise to anyone. Not long after, a thin voice informed him that the final crew member awoke. May stood up and surveyed her surroundings. All of the bridge crew seemed to be unharmed. Captain, Chief Engineer, May said as she stood at attention hastily and saluted. Nagi gave her a weak smile. Don't fuss over the formalities during a time like this. Yeah, really. We're all in this together, like Robinson Crusoe. Yes, understood. May raised her arm to salute once again, but stopped herself and simply bowed her head. She appeared to be a young and obedient woman. Right before Nagi smiled, though, he had remembered the young man that had vanished into space. The young man who Nagi had watched grow up, who saved the Moby Dick. Well, it might be a bit early to say we're saved. We have to fend for ourselves from here on out, so I'm afraid I'll have to forget about him for now. Nagi thought. He swiftly decided upon matters and begun to issue orders. The crew members who had left to scout had returned, one by one, and started carrying those new orders out. They began fending for themselves like that. Though, unlike Robinson Crusoe, they didn't have a homeland to return to across the sea. Nearly every section of the immigrant ship's hulls had their own artificial gravity generators, thanks to the foresight of the designer. They were originally expecting the voyages to last for quite some time, so they took measures to make sure the crew's bodies did not adapt to a zero-gravity environment. The artificial gravity generators consumed large amounts of energy, so there was fierce opposition against including them. But the ship's goals were to spread and maintain Earthkind and continue their lifestyle, which was important too. So the interiors of the residential sectors were fashioned like cities on Earth and built so that they could settle upon the surface of a planet. Such accommodations were very taxing on the ship's resources, but with the new DM engine technology, they were able to manage. But more importantly, the gravity generators had absorbed the impact of the crash. The bridge had its own generators, so they were able to escape any serious damage. Other sections with their own generators had probably survived the crash as well. First of all, we must locate the other pieces of the ship. First, we'll locate the residential sector, then the DM engine sector, and third, the lifehold. The crew listened with bated breath as Nagi explained the orders to them. The residential sector was necessary for them to live on the planet's surface, and although the primary engine was seriously damaged, they still had the auxiliary engine. Shelter and energy would be indispensable if they wanted to live on as a civilization, and... The lifeholds, huh? Yeah, we need to find those pronto. Vandam folded his arms and muttered. The lifehold was the immigrant ship's most important cargo. Most of the people who had departed Earth were asleep inside of them. My brother and parents are still in them, so... May muttered anxiously. The only people awake aboard the Moby Dick were the crew members, military personnel, and life system operators. It wasn't unusual for family members to be asleep inside the lifehold. However, assuming they withstood the crash, the systems would shut off if their energy reserves dried up. So it is that they must do everything in their power to rescue the people sleeping in them before that happens. They weren't in any immediate danger, but they didn't have forever to wait around either. Alright, then we'll start our search for the rest of the ship. First... The rest of Nagi's words were caught in his throat. Hey, Nagi. Yes, I know. Vandam had sensed it too. Only a small amount of starlight shone on the strange land at night, much like on Earth. Something was panting from the darkness. Panting and stomping. If they weren't trying to hide their presence, they probably weren't intelligent. Most likely they were native creatures. However, there was no difference between the danger of the aliens that wanted to exterminate the humans and these prowling native beasts. They would have to protect themselves from the approaching threat and more on this unknown planet. Everyone, are your sidearms ready? The crew all nodded at Nagi's words. All right, then we'll take them from here. We'll be at a disadvantage outside of the shelter. The approaching creatures were likely nocturnal. The crew would have no chance of surviving if they were disorganized. Nagi spoke in as calm a voice as he could to prevent them from panicking. All hands, form a circle with your backs to the center. Focus your fire on the enemies in front of you. Trust your backs and sides to the rest of the circle. Here they come! Human-sized figures jumped in through the multiple fissures in the bridge's outer wall. Creatures that would be later called Silnea. Human-sized figures jumped in through the multiple fissures in the bridge's outer wall. Creatures that would later be called Silnea. They were docile when hanging from the trees in the daytime, but at night they were ferocious. If they had dolls, there would be nothing to fear from the creatures, but the bridge was only equipped with small caliber sidearms. It was assumed they only needed these weapons to suppress mutinies on a spaceship's bridge or to fight hand-to-hand, so their lack of equipment was understandable. It would be a serious problem to have high-powered weapons around, as they might compromise the integrity of the hull of the ship. But right now they were fighting without any concern over the ship's integrity. Nevertheless, they put up a brave resistance. Nagi's directions were precise, and they managed a successful counterattack. The younger crew had put their trust in Vandem, whose imposing figure held a gun towards the giant crack in the wall. Despite being the chief engineer, he had the dignity of a veteran soldier and shot down another unknown creature with each pull of his trigger. It seems like we held out, Nagi had thought to himself. But to judge Nagi's evaluation would be unfair. He was unprepared. There was too much they didn't know regarding the planet and the creatures that inhabited it. All sorts of genetic abnormalities occur here. There were individual creatures whose strengths and intelligence and, at times even body size, transcended that of similar species. At this time, one such transcendental creature, a tyrant, appeared directly outside of the bulkhead of the bridge of the ship. An enormous, far too enormous creature. Nagi and the crew didn't even panic when it appeared through the gap in the wall. It is said that when faced with an incomprehensible sight, the minds of men become unable to process things properly. Everyone watched the gigantic behemoth in awe, their bodies too shocked to feel fear. Perhaps it appeared to be a messenger of the gods to them. No one moved at all as the gigantic creature raised what appeared to be its front leg and swung downwards.